What's up, YouTube? Thank you for stopping by the Line of Game. I'm your host, Jimmy. I mentioned in my video last night to kick out this channel, we're going to be talking about the Tennessee Volunteers. This is just a season recap. I got some notes right here. I got about halfway through the season when I realized that statistics and numbers and all of that, it doesn't define the season. If you're a Tennessee fan, and especially if you're a Tennessee hater. Let's turn back the clocks 2 years ago with Jeremy Pruitt running the program into the ground to a 3-7 season. The McDonald's bags allegations came out. I remember where I was that day. It was a terrible time as a Tennessee fan. The next year, Josh Heupel comes in. We didn't know much about him. We didn't know who he was. He takes that team from 3-7 to 7-5, loses in a bowl game on a questionable play, to say the absolute least. And we didn't have a whole lot of information to go off before the season started. Vegas set our win-loss total at 7.5, so 7-5 season, 8-4 season. We really didn't know where to go. At the time, I thought a 9-3 season was realistic. I predicted a 10-2 season with wins over everybody except for Alabama and Georgia. And if you go back to August, I sounded like a crazy person. A lot of people, I'm sure you felt the same way. And some of you haters, I'm sure you still feel the same way now. But we're going to get into the season recap. I've got notes to the LSU game. And then after that, it's just too emotional to sit down and read off numbers on a page. So let's get into it. I know we played a lot of cupcakes this year. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through those. But let's get started. So the first game of the season, we played Ball State, unranked. Boat race, 59 to 10. Everybody expected that. Hooker kind of came out slow. 18 to 25 for 221 and 2 touchdowns. That's a Group 5 team that you're talking about. Cedric Tillman was coming back. He was expected to be the number one guy this year. He had 6 catches for 68 yards, and probably the coolest thing about that game was Jalen Hyatt. We had an interception on the first play of the game. Just snatched it right from him, first play. Jalen Hyatt on a little slant, touchdown. That's all I'm going to say about that. But a couple teams lost. We were fortunate enough to move up to number 24. And we played on the road at number 17 Pitt. And last year we played at home against Pitt, and Milton was struggling. We blocked a punt on the first drive and got it at the 1 and actually took a lead for a little bit. But just were never able to establish and maintain a lead against Pitt last year. So there was a lot of questions coming in this year about what we were going to do against Pitt. And they were actually the defending ACC champions, ranked at number 17. We came out and beat them 34 to 27 in an immaculate overtime victory. We jumped out to a 24 to 3 lead. And after we got to that in the second half, the offense just stalled. And I will say one of the biggest things about that game, one of my biggest takeaways, was Josh Heupel learned that you got to keep scoring, especially when you're playing against legitimate competition. A lot of people at this point in the season now look and say, well, Pitt's unranked. Doesn't matter. They were number 17 team at the point of that game. Our offense just kind of stalled. Hooker started out slow too. I had a lot of people texting me about, that's Tennessee's quarterback. Give me all that garbage. But he finished 27 of 42 for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns. The pass rush was heavy. We had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, injured 2 quarterbacks, and the backup came back in. And he played tough. But, we threw that beautiful touchdown pass to Cedric Tillman in the end zone and then held him to a 4-and-out. And ended up getting out of Pittsburgh with a win. So from that point, we moved up to number 15, and we played Akron. That was another, ended up winning that game 63 to 6. That unfortunately was a game that Cedric Tillman got injured he got hit low on a block, and then later caught a pass, just got a little curl route and got hit low and injured. And we lost Tillman for a while after that. And he was supposed to be the guy of the offense, more so than Hendon Hooker at that point of the season, which tells you how far this team's come. But DJ Irons, their quarterback, he played well, and he was a very sharp, very tough, dual threat quarterback. Threw all over the place, ran all over the place, and this was really the first time in the season that we might have won 63-6, but you could see that the defense might have been a little bit of a problem. But he kind of gave us a preview of Anthony Richardson and JT Daniels coming up. But he went 32 of 44 for 241 and 0 touchdowns, unfortunately. But as dirty as Akron might have played, they did play tough and got out of there with a win. So we move on. Get bumped up to number 11. And then the game of the year for me, I'm a Jacksonville kid. I grew up 50 miles from the University of Florida. Nobody, and I mean nobody, hates the University of Florida more than me. But we moved up to number 11. And at this point, Florida started out the season unranked, and they beat number 7 Utah at home. Anthony Richardson looked like, at that point, he looked like a real Heisman Trophy contender. And Utah made some mistakes late. Florida wins that game, and they jumped up to number 13 at that point in the season. Turn around and lose to Kentucky and Will Levis a week after that, and there were some questions being asked around Gainesville, and some questions asked before the game. Is Anthony Richardson? Are we going to see the Anthony Richardson of the Utah game, or are we going to see the Anthony Richardson of the Kentucky game? And I will say, in that game, we saw the Anthony Richardson of the Utah game. He looked phenomenal that day. Tennessee had not beaten Florida since 2016. They won one of their last 17 against Florida. But it was an absolute instant classic. A CBS game at 3:30. I was down in Florida with some buddies to watch that. They were absolutely ecstatic and played very well. Hooker had a great game. He put up a Heisman Trophy performance. Richardson put up a Heisman Trophy performance. Hooker he threw for 349 yards, two touchdowns, and then rushed for another 112 and a rushing touchdown. Brew McCoy, this was really the first time, Brew McCoy transferred from USC. We didn't know a whole lot about Brew McCoy. He hadn't played much. He showed up that day. He had 5 receptions for 102 yards and 1 touchdown, and that's the first of at least a couple games that he had over 20 yards of reception. But Anthony Richardson on the other side, he had 435 yards passing, 2 touchdowns passing, and he did throw an interception late at the end of the game. We'll get to that in a second. But he had 62 yards rushing and another two touchdowns rushing and a fumble. That was a key turning point in that game. But Anthony Richardson combined, he was responsible for 515 yards, 4 touchdowns, but 2 turnovers that did end up being costly for the Florida Gators. But Tennessee was able to get out of there with a 38-33 win and move on. Hit the bye week, they get bumped up to number 8, and then they go down to Baton Rouge. And this was a game that I was personally at. I went to New Orleans, had a good time. Went down to Baton Rouge with my dad the next day, and it was expected to be a game for the ages. At the beginning of the season, people were more worried about LSU than they were Florida. My whole concern the whole time was I didn't know if we could beat Florida, but I thought we could handle LSU. We headed down to Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge and played number 25 LSU that had just gotten bumped into the top 25. They had a unfortunate early loss to Florida State on a blocked extra point the first week of the season in the Superdome. But it's Baton Rouge, it's Tiger Stadium. Those fans are always going to be loud. They're going to be crazy. It's going to be a tough place to play. Unfortunately, that week, CBS had chosen to put I think it was Georgia and Auburn on at 3:30, and what was it? Alabama and Texas A&M on in prime time. So we had a noon kickoff on ESPN or SEC Network, one of the two. It's all the same. It's all owned by ESPN. But I was excited for maybe a Death Valley matchup at night. I've been there 4 or 5 times, never gotten to see it at night. But the first play of scrimmage, we kick the ball off, recover the football, go down, score a touchdown. We get the ball back, run it back deep, end up just kicking a field goal, start out up 10-0. From the very first, from not even the first snap of the ball, but from the first kick, that Tennessee absolutely dominated from start to finish of that game. Jabari Small had 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. Brew McCoy had 7 receptions for 140 yards. No touchdowns, but he did average 20 yards a catch, and that was an absolutely phenomenal game for Brew McCoy. But I will say this, we saw it a little bit in the Pitt game. We saw it a little bit in the Akron game, and we definitely saw it in the Florida game, that we struggle on defense. JT Daniels, who did not look very good against Florida State, ended up throwing for 300 yards and a touchdown, but also an interception. They only put up 13 points, but it was starting to look like the defense was a glaring problem at the onset of the LSU game. And this is where I just got to go off script, and I'm going to bring up the rest of the season, because from this point forward, when we started 5-0, the season just got absolutely emotional. So the next week, third Saturday of October, we play number 3 Alabama, ranked as number 6 Tennessee. We all know that's the Hyatt game where he put up 5 touchdowns. Tennessee jumped out to a 28-10 lead. Absolutely phenomenal performance. We haven't seen anything like that from Tennessee against Alabama. Haven't beaten Alabama since 2006. But Hendon Hooker put up 385 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. The interception was a little weak. Poor decision. But the big story of that game was Bryce Young was absolutely phenomenal. Bryce Young was an absolute magician in that game. If it wasn't for Bryce Young, Tennessee would have won by 3 scores. Bryce Young was all over the field. He was making incredible throws. If you remember back at the time, Bryce Young was coming off a shoulder injury. And he came out. Gary Danielson wasn't sure if he was going to be able to complete passes. He threw all over the place. Phenomenal game from Bryce Young. Proved why he was the Heisman Trophy winner last year. However, it just wasn't enough. A missed field goal at the end of the game by Alabama allowed Tennessee to go 50 yards in 15 seconds and kick a 40-yard field goal. Chase McGrath made the knuckleball. I don't know if it was blocked. I don't know if it was a bad kick. I don't know what it was other than it went through the uprights. And we were smoking cigars in Knoxville. Great game. So from that point, Tennessee jumps to number 1. Actually, excuse me. No, they did jump to number 1. They did jump to number 1. Played against Kentucky. This was the blackout game. They wore the black jerseys, black helmets. This is the first time they've worn black helmets, I think, ever. Absolutely phenomenal game. People say Will Levis is a first-round draft. People say Anthony Richardson is a first-round draft pick. I feel like it requires more to play quarterback at the NFL level than, being able to throw the ball far and being able to run around a little bit and being 6'5". But Will Levis played a terrible game. Will Levis was 16 for 27. It's like 60% for 98 yards, 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. Hendon Hooker came through for 245 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then I would say my favorite play of the season was during that game when the Kentucky Wildcats were down inside the 10. Ball popped free, I believe by Andre Turrentine. And then Jawan Mitchell grabs it and just takes it down the field, down to, at that point, you knew the Vols would not be denied. So next on the schedule, Tennessee has moved to number 1 outright. They're number 1 in in the college football playoffs. This is the first week that the college football playoffs are out. Georgia is number 1 in the AP, and Tennessee is number 2. Tennessee is number 1 in the college football playoff poll, and Georgia is number 3. So this is the first time in history that number 1 in the playoffs plays number 1 in the AP. My prediction of this game was wrong. I thought rather than this being a battle of Tennessee offense versus Tennessee defense, was Stetson Bennett going to be able to score on Tennessee's defense? At that point through the season, the secondary of Tennessee looked weak, but the pass rush was absolutely phenomenal. Stetson Bennett had struggled against Missouri. But the way the game transpired, Tennessee forced a fumble on the first drive and was not able to get a touchdown out of it. People say that Georgia controlled the entire game it was not that. It was not Tennessee LSU. We got up 3-0 after kicking the ball off. And then from that point, we just weren't able to get the offense going. Hendon Hooker threw his second interception of the game of the season, which sucked. But Stetson Bennett went 17 for 25 for 257 and 2 touchdowns. And Kenny McIntosh, the leading rusher, he only had 10 carries for 52 yards. Georgia kind of just iced the game at that point. They got up big in the first half and just had no need to continue to run the score up. They play a very different offense than Tennessee does. But it came down to just like the 2015 Super Bowl between Peyton Manning and the Legion of Boom. If you remember that, whenever an elite offense goes up against an elite defense, the elite defense tends to come out on top. That's not always the case, but unfortunately, Georgia happened to shut down Tennessee, and at that point, Tennessee drops to 5 in the college football playoff rankings. All they got to do is win out. For all the college football expansionists out there, all Tennessee, LSU, and Alabama had to do was win out, and they're in the playoffs. But we'll get into that. So the next week, Tennessee goes to Missouri. Everybody's talking about, Tennessee, they just came off a loss. Are they going to sleep on Missouri? Not 66-24. Is it even worth talking about? Hendon Hooker threw all over the place. Really, really, really made a case for the Heisman Trophy. Dylan Sampson, the freshman, this was the first time we really got to see him in all season. We had seen him in the Akron game a little bit. We'd seen him in the Ball State game a little bit, but he had 8 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. Dylan Sampson is going to be a terrific running back at Tennessee. He is so fast. He moves so quick. And it was good to see him get meaningful carries, meaningful minutes in a conference game, in a divisional game. And then Jalen Hyatt had 7 receptions for 146 and a touchdown. Again, another Tennessee receiver averaging over 20 yards receiving, 20 yards per catch. So that was wonderful to see. And then we go to what a lot of y'all have been fighting about, and for the Tennessee haters, what a lot of y'all have been celebrating. I live in North Carolina, about 4 hours away from Columbia. I went down to this myself. I had to circle on my calendar just to go down and have a good time. But if you're Tennessee at this point, all you got to do is win, and you get in the playoffs. If not, if you win out and you don't get in the playoffs, then you're welcome to cry because you lost to the number one team. But this is where there's a big divide in the Tennessee fan base, and between the college football, they're keeping college football the way it is, and the college football expansionists. Tennessee goes down to Columbia, South Carolina, playing against a 6-4 South Carolina team that got absolutely boat raced by Florida the week before. Florida didn't give up an offensive touchdown. South Carolina scored on a fake punt. Florida beat South Carolina 38-6. And what do we do is, I've been a Tennessee fan long enough to know that you can never. I was there in 2016 when we beat Florida and Georgia and turned around and lost to South Carolina and Vandy at the end of the year. I know no win is guaranteed as a Tennessee fan. We made Spencer Rattler look like the best quarterback in the history of football. Spencer Rattler went absolutely off. He scored touchdowns on 8 of 9 possessions. The only time South Carolina didn't score, there were 2 times South Carolina didn't score, and one of them really doesn't count because it was victory formation and in the game. But the second possession of the second half, other than that, they went down the field meticulously, just chunk play after chunk play after chunk play. I sat there in the stands at Williams-Brice with Sandstorm playing behind me. Fans going crazy. In the upper deck, the stadium shaking underneath me. There was nothing Tennessee could do defensively. And you talk about Jeremy Banks. You could talk about whatever you want. Tennessee did not show up to play with playoffs on the line. And that's where I want to get into the college football expansion and the playoffs and all that. I am not a big fan of the current college football playoff format. If I were the one in charge, I would have done it differently. However, all you have to do if you're Tennessee is win. You have to go into Columbia and win. You have to go into Vanderbilt, Nashville, and win. And you are in the playoffs because Ohio State or Michigan have to beat each other. Tennessee didn't get it done. So for all the people that are out there saying, oh, well, if we had a 12-team playoff, then Tennessee... Doesn't matter. It really does. Do you really want that? Honestly. Would you be saying that about LSU as a Tennessee fan? Oh, well, LSU, they lost to Texas A&M, but they might still be in the top 12. They should be a playoff. No, we beat them by 27 points. They might have beat Alabama, but then they turn around and lose to Texas A&M and Florida State at the beginning of the season. Completely different teams. But, I mean, come on. As a Tennessee fan, you gotta have the standard as a Tennessee fan where this program is, where it has been historically. Have the pride to understand that loss to South Carolina was unacceptable. And, hey, get better. Build a defense. Look at Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart had that same problem at Georgia, except it was opposite. Kirby Smart had the defense to win national championships. Put real, legitimate NFL players on defense into the league. Just didn't have the offense. What did he do? He went out, fixed the offense, recruited running backs, got guys like George Pickens, Brock Bowers. And in 2 or 3, 4 short years, guess what? Georgia goes from, 5, because, no, 4, because we're talking 2017 to 2021. They go from losing in the national championship when they had a national championship level defense to absolutely dominating throughout the playoffs. And Tennessee is more than capable of doing that. I don't know if it comes down to we just need to shell out the NIL. We need to hit the transfer portal. I think we're going to do that in the offseason. Or if we just need to go buy an elite defensive coordinator. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. It's in the past. Lost to South Carolina in a heartbreaking fashion. And then lastly, we already know it's little brother Vanderbilt. We roll into that. We roll in there. Oh, before I even go there, shout out to Hendon Hooker. Should have been a Heisman. Was my Heisman front runner from the beginning of the season. People were talking about C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams. I know that the Heisman Trophy has become a beauty contest. It is just a statistics producing. It's just not what it used to be. The Heisman Trophy is not the best player in college football. It's not the MVP. It's just who is the best player on the perceived best team that maintains it 12 games a year. If we're talking about the most valuable player, Hendon Hooker took a 3-17 to 7-5 and then to 10-2. But unfortunately, he went around to play he lost to South Carolina and went around to play the last game. Hendon Hooker had a phenomenal season. It's terrible that he went down the way he did. Prayers for Hendon Hooker. Thank you so much for what you did. You will be a Vol. I'll be telling my grandkids about Hendon Hooker. However, we go into Nashville with Joe Milton starting. There's a lot of questions about Joe Milton, especially based off of last year and his performance, especially against Pitt. It was pouring rain, wind blowing 20 miles an hour. First drive, he just comes out and lays a dime on Jalen Hyatt from 60 yards, and the Vols never looked back from there. So they end up winning at 56 to nothing. Just blanked Vanderbilt, and that's the first time that Tennessee shut out anybody since 2013 against, who'd you think, Vanderbilt. So here's where we go from here for me. I think we're obviously a New Year's Six team. I think we will, regardless of win or loss in the bowl game, we will finish in the top 10 for the first time, and I can't tell you how long. As somebody who expected, 9-3, it was. If you told me 10-2 was going to happen, I would have been ecstatic in August. But it's not August. There's a recalculation of expectations. We did have a phenomenal year. For all the nega Vols out there, come on, man. You would give up everything for a 10-2 season when Jeremy Pruitt ran the program in the ground at 3-7. But for the individuals out there that believe that it's better than last year, so we were at 9-1 with playoffs on the line and got boat raced by South Carolina. That's not acceptable. I don't know if Tim Banks is the guy at defensive coordinator. I don't know if we need to give him more resources or if we need to go out and just purchase a defensive coordinator and recruit a better defense. I don't know the solution to that problem. However, this season was absolutely phenomenal, but it was also a disappointment. Both can be true at the same time. My projection for the rest of the season, playoff committee is going to drop their rankings tomorrow night. From what I've seen about what the playoff committee believes, Tennessee should be ahead of Alabama and we should go to the Sugar Bowl. But from what I've seen that the playoff committee actually does in practice, there's no way we're ahead of Alabama. They love them too much. We probably go to the Orange Bowl. Either way, if I told you in August that we were going to the Sugar Bowl or the Orange Bowl, take your pick, every one of you would have been happy. So don't blame Heupel. Don't blame. Actually, I'm not going to talk about the defense. Blame them if you want. But we got a lot to build on. We still got a long way to go. This was a phenomenal outcome of a season. And I think the 2020s are going to be the decade of the Vols and a lot to come to. But anyways, hit that like, share, comment, subscribe. If you stayed this long, I really appreciate you watching. I'm going to have more content coming out. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing a review of the Battle of Atlantis. Vols leave Kings of Atlantis. That was amazing. We're going to be talking conference championships. I'm going to be getting into some other teams. And then just drop in the comments section what you want to hear about. And I'll be happy to talk about it. Give you my opinion. All right. Anyways, thank you very much. Take care. Go Vols.